Holmes was at that time was the president of the Association of Black Psychologists, and her notion was just to simply allow those who wanted to share what was on their minds, for lack of a better word. It gave them an opportunity just to talk about the experience, and it was non-judgmental. Whatever they felt like saying, they could say it. And there were psychologists who were present who, if a person felt that he or she needed to just speak in more private conversation-like settings, then they set up a session that could occur. And what was most interesting and I think revealing about who we are as African people is that it was done pro bono. And that was the whole notion around how we wanted this organization to function, Black Family Summit, was that any services that you would be providing, it would be provided pro bono. Or in some instances, if it was a psychiatrist or a psychologist and a person could afford, then we would do a sliding scale fee. I'm sort of getting ahead of myself, but in terms of New Orleans, all the services that were provided while we were there were pro bono services. So that was pretty much how the healing circle concept evolved. You were set in a circle, and you were supported by those in the circle with regard to whatever you were expressing in terms of your pain and your suffering. So, and I guess...
And the professionals there...
facilitated the session.
Right, the psychologists and psychiatrists facilitated it and provided counseling at the same time?
Yes. Mm-hmm. For those who wanted some further conversations or counseling sessions, then they set up a separate room right on premises for that to occur. And I also should add that the National Association of Black Social Workers also had clinicians who were present and helping to support and augment the services of the Association of Black Psychologists and the Black Psychiatrists of America and the All Healers Mental Health Alliance. So that's how the sessions in New Orleans went. Mm-hmm. We left New Orleans, and one thing I should say is that the Association of Black Psychiatrists, the Black Psychiatrists of America, All Healers Mental Health Alliance, and the Association of Black Psychologists were interested in providing counseling services pro bono in New Orleans, as well as Mississippi, because if you recall, when Katrina hit, it also had a devastating effect on Mississippi.
Yeah, Biloxi and those areas.
Yes, any of those areas that were on the water.
Right.
And the long and the short of the story is, we ran into a problem with licensure. There was no reciprocity, despite, and I will not characterize Mississippi and Louisiana the way that I normally would. I'll just leave it at this by saying that if you were licensed to practice in New York, Washington, D.C., or wherever, reciprocity was not allowed by the states of Mississippi and Louisiana. You would have to take a test in order to provide your pro bono services. So this is very frustrating to us. So as I'm struggling with how now to move this to another level, we reconvened. When I say we, by now the Black Family Summit has been reconstructed under the Institute of Black World 21st Century with the blessings of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. And I reconvened a group at Howard University, I think it was the latter part of January of 2005. And the purpose was to, again, figure out how could we provide these pro bono psychological services to our communities throughout the country. And to my surprise, someone had invited Dr. Anel Prent, who at the time had just convened a group called the All Healers Mental Health Alliance. She and Dr. Phyllis Harrison Ross, a psychiatrist out of New York, who was the president of the organization, were trying to figure out how could these services also be provided. So rather than duplicate what we were attempting to do, we merged our services and our efforts, and the All Healers Mental Health Alliance became a part of the Institute of Black World 21st Century's Black Family Summit. That's a little bit of the background in terms of how the Black Family Summit evolved and got to somewhat where it is today. there are some pieces that are missing, and I'll just sort of let you guide me here and ask some further questions, and I'll be able to blend it in.
Okay, so highlights over the last 3-4 years in terms of the work of the Black Family Summit post the Katrina healing circles. What can you recall as some of the milestones since then, leading up to today? And then I want to come back and talk about some of the current initiatives, including the FEMA agreement.
Okay.
That cast your memory back 4 years, 3, 4, 5 years. Some of the highlights along that trajectory.
Well, one of the highlights I like to focus on has to do with public policy. Coming out of the Katrina catastrophe, it was very evident that we need to look at making certain recommendations to, especially Congressional Black Caucus, policies that would enhance and strengthen the black family. So again, we reconvened a public policy forum under the auspices of Dr. Tricia Ben Goodley at Howard University. And we pulled together 15 of those Black Family Summit national organizations, and each of them concretized 3 priority legislative agenda items that they thought the Black Caucus and the Congress in general should consider. So that's a document that I hope I'll be able to pull up and get on our website at some point, because I keep asking Dr. Goodley if she has a copy. It's there. I know we did it because we gave it to, at the time, Dr. Elsie Scott, who was the executive director of the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. And she in turn disseminated that to the appropriate chairs of committees. So that was one highlight that I wanted to share. The second one that sticks out in my memory is more recent, and that would be Hurricane Sandy when it hit New York City, specifically certain sections of Brooklyn and Queens, as it impacted the black community. We've always struggled with how best to have a relationship with FEMA that would enhance and allow the resources that we have as African scholars and African practitioners, and especially African-centered clinicians, to provide our services to our communities when disasters occur. Sandy presented a very unique opportunity from my perspective for this to happen. And what it did was we were able to identify 3 communities that had been adversely impacted as a result of Hurricane Sandy. And we were able to mobilize 21.
Can you remember the names of those 3 communities?
Yes, the 3 communities. The first community was the Auvergne section of Queens, which was just devastated beyond belief. Auvergne sits on almost on the ocean, so to speak. It's out by the airport, and anyone who has a memory of the water in that area, they were cut off from any access to services from the time Hurricane Sandy hit until about mid-February. No resources for all of the supermarkets were closed, the whole 9. The transportation system was cut down. And what's unique about it is that there are approximately 50-some housing development, public housing structures. And that's predominantly something like 85 to 90% black or Latino. And the psychological impact that had was just devastating. So we were able to, that's one community. The other community was the Coney Island section of Brooklyn. And the third community was the Canarsie section of Brooklyn. The Canarsie section of Brooklyn is comprised primarily of African Caribbeans and continental Africans. You contrast that with Coney Island, that's an emerging mix of all of those black communities, wherein Auvergne is predominantly old black communities. So what we did was, under the auspices of the All Healers Mental Health Alliance and Institute of Black World 21st Century's Black Family Summit, and I always like to give credit to Dr. Anel Prim, who, as I said earlier, is the convener of the All Healers Mental Health Alliance, but she was also one of the deputy directors rather, for the American Psychiatric Association. So through her work with the American Psychiatric Association, we were able to get a grant to pull together 21 black professional healing organizations in a one-day orientation and training session regarding how best we could pool our resources to provide services to those three communities. Coming out of that training session, that was held on December the 17th, if my memory serves me correctly, in 2010, we selected those three communities: the Association of Black Social Workers New York City chapter and the Association of Black Psychologists chapter chose, I think it was Canarsie, as the site that they would provide services. The All Healers Mental Health Alliance and the Black Psychiatrists New York City chapter chose the section out in Auburn. I may have that reversed, because now, no, let me go back. Out in Auburn, it was the New York City chapter and the Nassau-Suffolk County chapter of the Association of Black Social Workers who provided the services there. In Coney Island, it was the Caribbean Association of Social Workers and the Black Psychiatrists of New York Association who provided the mental health counseling services in that community. In Canarsie, it was the Association of Black Psychologists, along with, I'm blocking the organization that Dr. Martha Sullivan chaired, but it was an organization that dealt with the elderly, black elderly, and also with substance abusers. And so they provided services in the Canarsie section. So that's one highlight I wanted to share. The other highlight I think that I need to focus on is that since Katrina hit, every other Sunday night since 2005, the All Healers Mental Health Alliance convenes a conference call at 7 p.m. every 2 weeks to figure out ways in which we can continue to support families that have been displaced as a result of Katrina. And specifically, what the All Healers Mental Health Alliance did was to find several communities in which they could provide these services. First, it was New Orleans. Then we had services providing in Houston, meaning they had psychiatrists who were working in that area. Atlanta, Georgia, and I'm blocking the other one. Oh, New York City. So that continue as we speak today. That conversation, that support continues to be provided.
Mm-hmm. Beyond providing services and relief support to communities that have suffered from natural disasters like hurricanes and major storms and things of that sort, what role does the Black Family Summit play on an ongoing basis to address what Ron Daniels calls the state of emergency in the so-called black ghettos of the cities of America? Not only the social and economic crisis that is ongoing, but also the trauma that is experienced almost on a daily basis by black families throughout the country, the consequence of violence within the community, violence visited on the community from outside forces, including law enforcement officers. So what I'm asking is, beyond providing services in natural emergency situations, how do you see the work of the Black Family Summit addressing the sort of the day-to-day crises that so many of our people are forced to live with?
Right. I'm glad you asked that, Don. One of the, I think, positive, all of them are positive features, but one of the unique features, I guess, would be that every professional organization that is a member of the Institute of Black World 21st Century's Black Family Summit has its own set of priorities. So how we function is that if there is an issue that, say, the Association of Black Psychologists wants to promote, then we will mobilize Black Family Summit organizations to support that. It may be legislation that's being proposed or any other of their projects. So members will support that through whatever means the organization is requesting that that support be provided. But let me get more specific in terms of your question. The example that I like to use best is Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. 3 years ago, I was invited to be the keynote speaker at the Alliance of Black Social Workers conference. And their theme was youth violence and fratricide, which, as you know, Dr. Daniels has been promoting and asking and encouraging us as African people to become more cognizant of the impact of this and how can we pool our collective resources to impact it. Well, in the city of Philadelphia, for the past 2 years, through the Philadelphia Justice Collaborative, which is an emerging IBW formation, we have been able to mobilize the Philadelphia black community around this whole issue of youth violence and fratricide. As we conduct this interview, we're in the process now, the planning stages of pulling off the second conference around this. And what this will do, it will bring to the table all the significant actors who can impact in a very positive way, hopefully, the violence that is so prevalent, not only in Philadelphia, but throughout our communities. And the notion is that the more you collaborate and pool your resources, the more likely it is that you'll have a positive, more positive impact on helping to reduce this. So Mothers Against Violence is I think it's called Mothers Against Violence, whose organization, Dorothy Spate Johnson, is a member of the Institute of Black World 21st Century Black Family Summit. These are mothers mothers in charge. Mothers in charge, thank you very much. Whose organization focuses on mothers who have lost children to violence. She herself, as you know, lost her son, 19-year-old son, to street violence. The city of Philadelphia's mental health department is a partner in this effort. The police department for the city of Philadelphia is a key partner in this effort that we're all trying to promote. The list is endless of the partners that have mobilized and come together to help us pull together the conference, which I think will be held on November the 20th, and then a subsequent town hall meeting the day before. I may be getting my dates and times mixed up. But this is one example of how you build these collaboratives in such a way that it will have, first, what it does is that it cuts down this whole notion that I'm in my own little silo. Right. How do you figure out a way to have organizations work together, not in competition, but in the collective and make that an effort that yields more positive working relationships around a specific issue.
Right. And the concept of the healing circles that got started in New Orleans as a result of Katrina, that too can be replicated in places like Philadelphia and Pittsburgh and Baltimore and Washington, D.C., other cities where IBW has developed and is growing similar justice collaboratives like what you just talked about in Philadelphia. So do you see the Black Family Summit playing a role in collaboration with the various justice collaboratives to bring about a healing process in communities that have been adversely affected by fratricide and youth violence, and also to encourage an intergenerational dialogue?
Oh, absolutely. That's central to our effort to promote this whole notion of healing and how do you address the trauma. And I guess I need to continue to uplift the Association of Black Psychologists for its healing circle model. Just to add some support, credence to how important it is, they kicked this off initially, not only in New Orleans, but they chose a town, and that was Tuskegee, Alabama, where the outgoing mayor adopted this whole healing circle model, and the Association of Black Psychologists has implemented it there for the past 3 or 4 years. Yes, the answer is we need to figure out a way, and I think the organizations are very much comfortable with how can we institute these models in all of these cities. As you can appreciate, resource capacity gets to be just a little bit of a problem from time to time, and we have to do it sort of incrementally. Those cities where we know that there's that capacity to do it, then we're trying to move that process forward.
In addition to that, the Black Family Summit, under your leadership, has reached a breakthrough, we could even say historic agreement, with FEMA to work with FEMA and provide services in addition to FEMA services to communities in the future that are impacted by natural disasters and catastrophes. Can you talk about that FEMA relationship, how it came about and where it is today, and what's going to be happening as that relationship evolves in the next several weeks and months?
Yes, let me again back up and say that there's been enormous frustration over the years, starting specifically with Katrina, in terms of how FEMA had responded to our desire as Black professional organizations to provide our services to our communities. And it's been a very convoluted process. A lot of frustration over the past 10 years has occurred. But I must again highlight and pay special tribute to someone who has really paved the way for us moving to where we're about to sign this historic agreement on September the 25th during the Congressional Black Caucus Weekend Legislative Caucus events. Back in 2011, August to be specific, let me back up. In July of 2011, Sister Jackie Patterson, who is an IBW board member and also the director of the NAACP's Environmental Justice Project, approached Ron and me and Rosalind Prudhomme about reaching out to African American organizations to attend a summit that FEMA was going to convene and wanted to convene that would help them become more sensitive to what were some of the cultural issues that FEMA should be paying attention to when disasters occur and impact the Black community in particular. So Sister Jackie allowed me to reach out to about 25 other national Black organizations, actually it's 30 some, as I think about it now, 35 I believe, Black organizations, to extend them an invitation to attend a 3-day summit in Washington, D.C. that FEMA funded and coordinated. Dr. Daniels, Sister Rosalind Prudhomme, and myself, we represented the Institute of Black World 21st Century. As I said earlier, there were about 35 other national Black organizations that I invited through Jackie to attend.
Are they also members of the Black Family Summit? Most of them, I guess, huh?
Yeah, 25 of them were. There were some other organizations that are not Black Family Summit organizations, but because of the relationship that IBW has had over the years, we were able to invite them and they accepted our invitation to attend. So coming out of that 3-day summit was an idea that an advisory committee could be established that would work directly with Administrator Craig Fugate and give him our best thinking around what program models would work best in terms of cultural relevance, one. Two, when disasters would occur in certain communities, who are on the ground people who should be contacted. And through these organizations, we knew they would know best who these people were. And again, I have to go back as an example to the disaster in New York, Hurricane Sandy. I don't want to give myself any credit, but I will at least acknowledge and say how it happened. When Coney Island in particular was having difficulty accessing FEMA representatives and resource people, Dr. Nell Prim had invited me to be a part of a conversation that was going on. This is 3 days into the disaster. And as I listened to the conversation, we were having phone calls at 10 a.m. every day. And this had been going on. I had joined the calls like 2 days before, but I had not heard some of the problems that the communities were having in terms of FEMA not being available. So as a result, the result of our relationships, which we had established through the summit back in August of 2011, I was able to call Administrator Fugate's executive assistant, and he in turn was able to direct immediately to those communities the resources, meaning the people on the ground, to provide direction and services to those affected communities. So that's an example of what came out of this summit as a result of Jackie Patterson having invited us. Now, fast forward the tape. We held several preliminary meetings afterwards in terms of, when I say preliminary, the meetings were geared towards how do we set up this advisory panel or council or board, or however you want to describe it. In January of 2012, Dr. Daniels, Jackie Patterson, Reverend Randy Vaughn, who is the president of the National Black Baptist Convention's USA's Disaster Preparedness Committee, Dr. Patricia Pat Newton, who was then the president of the Black Psychiatrists of America, and Dr. Nell Prim came in on the conference call from the convener of the All Hills Mental Health Alliance. We met with Administrator Fugate, and he was very responsive to our requests and said that he concurred that an advisory council would be very useful and helpful to him and to his staff as disasters occurred. The question then was, what should be the composition of the group? So we said it had to represent all of the organizations that were members of the Institute of Black World 21st Century's Black Family Summit. So move this process forward. We are now at a stage where on September 25th of this year, during the Congressional Black Caucus, Legislative Caucus weekend, we will be signing a memorandum of agreement with Administrator Fugate and FEMA that in essence allows us to have face-to-face conversations with him on a regular basis. We got to work out the mechanics of how all this will flow, but essentially we will be an advisory body to FEMA on issues that impact the black community, and especially those issues that have of cultural significance and relevance. We will be advising them, guiding them, suggesting to them how they should respond and who they should be responding to in different communities. We will do this because through the Black Family Summit, these organizations have the best contacts on the ground. They know who the key players are. So that's in a nutshell where we are with that.
Okay, great. That's coming up. That's going to happen very soon.
Yes, sir.
Beyond that, what's your vision for the future work of the Black Family Summit? What kind of road do you want to take it down? In other words, you've got 23 organizations?
Yeah, it's 23 now, and we've got 2 others pending. I've just got to do the paperwork with them, and they'll be joining us in the next 10 to 15 days, hopefully.
So you've got potentially, many thousands of people who are dedicated to improving the African American communities through their respective organizations and their agendas and their work. But in terms of bringing them all together into a collaborative, you might say, that enhances each other's work and enhances the work of IBW moving forward. What is your vision for a BFS, a Black Family Summit, a year from now?
Good question. I sort of see myself as being the connector, and that's Ron Daniels, my dear friend. I really appreciate his vision of how you bring organizations together who are doing similar work, but oftentimes are not in conversation, as he would say, about the issue. At this juncture, I think we need to sort of take a step back and see how can we mutually agree on what are the issues that cross all these organizations that we all can mobilize ourselves around. I think sometimes we...
One example, not to cut you off, recent example of that, correct me if I'm wrong, was BFS, all the BFS organizations getting together to lend support and provide solidarity to the recent Free Her rally in Washington, D.C. that highlighted the plight of incarcerated African American women, mothers and daughters who are locked up in the prisons of America, most of them for petty crimes related to the war on drugs. Black Family Summit came out with a statement in support of that. You anticipate that that kind of expression of solidarity with initiatives of that sort will continue in the future?
Oh, absolutely. I'm glad you raised that. That's a concrete example of one organization, which is a member of the Black Family Summit, Attorney Andrea James's organization, coming to Institute of Black World 21st Century's Black Family Summit, and just sort of sharing with us what she was envisioning, and then us reaching out then to all of these organizations, and they in turn enthusiastically offering their support for this rally. That's how I see other issues coming down the pike. And let me go back in time. When the earthquake hit Haiti, this is another example of issues that bubble up that mobilization is relatively easy to do. There was the children, as if you recall, were being orphaned and sent to Salt Lake City, Utah, all of these places, but virtually none were ending up in the black community. We mobilized, when I say we, Institute of Black World 21st Century Black Family Summit, I convened a conference call. And at that time, there were 7 black adoption agencies left in this country. And all 7 of those executive directors joined me, joined black psychologists, joined black psychiatrists, joined the National Association of Black Social Workers, joined the All Heals Mental Health Alliance. And we began to work in collaboration with the State Department to begin to direct those children into black adoption agencies, back into our communities. In New York State in particular, we had a colleague who was working in the New York State Office of Children and Family Services. We were able to, her relationship with the New York City chapter of the Association of Black Social Workers, get some of those children redirected into black communities in New York City. Secondly, we knew that again, post-traumatic stress was going to be a significant problem for the Haitian communities in Brooklyn, Boston in particular, and in Washington, D.C. So through the embassy, the Washington, D.C. embassy of the Haitian government, we were able to provide counseling services on the spot, pro bono, to embassy staff and the families of those that they had identified who were living in the Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Maryland area. And the same thing occurred in Brooklyn, New York, Spring Valley, New York, and Boston. Simultaneously, the Association of Black Psychologists, they had a crisis trauma unit that was headed by Dr. Wade Noble, who was one of the past presidents of the Association of Black Psychologists. We teamed with him, and when Dr. Daniels went down to Haiti on behalf of the Institute of Black World 21st Century, Wade and a contingent of the Association of Black Psychologists went with them, and they were able to provide not counseling in its purest sense, but they were able to assist clinicians on the ground in Haiti with, some suggested ways in which coping skills could be developed for people who were so adversely affected. We did that work from the time that, as you will recall, Dr. Daniels was already in Miami the day of the hurricane, ready to go over to Haiti. But naturally he couldn't go as a result of the earthquake. But what he did was to ask me if I would look at ways in which we could support those communities. The third point I wanted to make around that is we, through Dr. Daniels and his relationship with individuals there in Haiti, we were able to create what was called the Oasis Institute, an orphanage for children on the ground, girls specifically. And we mobilized here through the Black Family Summit financial and other support for this orphanage. And that went on from the time of the earthquake up until about a year ago, when there were a few logistical problems that on the ground in Haiti we could no longer work with. I share this with you because that's another example of how IBW's Black Family Summit was able to instantaneously mobilize around an issue that cut across all of the disciplines. No one was concerned about turf. They knew that this was an emergency issue that required the support of everyone, and so we mobilized around that.
And you also were instrumental in working with Dr. Daniels and other board members of IBW to pull together a conference, a mini conference in Baltimore that brought representatives of several of the Black Family Summit organizations all together in one place.
Yes.
To interface with each other and to interface with other constituencies that IBW works with. Do you have plans to organize regular conferences, symposia, get-together sessions in the future?
Yes, as a matter of fact, Dr. Daniels has always promoted this notion that conversations are critical in the interim period between face-to-face sessions. So we had a conference call, I guess that's the best way to describe it, with, for example, Attorney Mark Morial, around legislative issues that the
Mark Morial being the president of the National Urban League.
Right. Thank you for clarifying who he is. And what they heard were some of the policy issues that the National Urban League has been focused on at the national level, and how we can work in partnership with them to support that effort. The same is true with others. The Congressional Black Caucus, we're now at a juncture where we feel that we should begin to have some conversations with, for example, Congressman Danny Davis around this whole issue of reentry. As you know, one of our constituent organizations, being a member of this Black Family Summit, is the Center for New Leadership on Urban Solutions, which is the only formally incarcerated policy and think tank in the country that was formerly at a university and is staffed by all formerly incarcerated persons. Danny Davis has a special interest in this population. As a matter of fact, I'm convening a session for him at the up-and-coming Congressional Black Caucus around this whole notion and the problems that families of children, rather, of incarcerated parents are having. So Dr. Daniels' view, and I concur with him, is that we should have a more in-depth conversation with the congressman. So one of the things I'm going to be doing in the next 2 or 3 months is to convene a conference call with the Black Family Summit organization, with Congressman Davis, so that they can become a little bit more conversant about this whole issue of reentry, one. Two, what are some of the barriers and challenges that formerly incarcerated persons are having? Voting rights issues, how do you get that restored, which is a legislative piece, I think, that needs to be tackled across the country, and other issues, barriers that they are confronted with that those of us who have never been incarcerated never think about. Mm-hmm. So we've had an excellent working relationship with the congressman, and there are others. Congressman Conyers, who is a dear colleague of Dr. Daniels. We are looking to figure out ways in which we can be supportive of this whole reparations movement, for example, that you have been so intricately yourself involved with at the international level. We'd like to figure out ways in which we can bring members of the Institute of Black World 21st Century Black Family Summit into this conversation. And as we are speaking, it would seem to me that one way that we could do this is to, again, have just a conversation, maybe a conference call, and have you and others sort of give a perspective on what does this mean in terms of our families, meaning the reparations issue. How does that relate to black families? And so the ideas are just so many and so numerous, but we have to kind of keep it. First, we got to always remember that each organization has its own priorities. And that's one of the challenges, you know. The second is that the fluidity, for lack of a better word, of the leadership of these organizations almost changes every year. Mm-hmm. So that's a little challenge for us, but we've been fortunate because we have had good relationships with most of the former presidents, and they've bought into this whole notion that working together in a collaborative way to support black families across the board just makes sense. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I'm not quite sure, to be honest with you, Don, exactly where we're going to go with a lot of the issues, but I can assure you that there is no shortage of ideas and issues that all of these organizations can be supportive of. And again, without being overly redundant, I have to always be mindful that each of them have their own set of priorities. Right. And that's why we came up with this whole notion of a report card that we could give to Congress about what should be the legislative issues that should be addressed by various organizations.
Gotcha. Okay. We'll wrap it up. Any final concluding thoughts? Thanks for exhaustive answers to those questions. But ideally, what would you like to see the Black Family Summit grow into or consolidate into as all of us struggle to find ways and means to bring healing to black families that have been devastated by the war on drugs, by fratricide, by neglect from the larger society, and from the government in particular. If you had a wish list, so to speak, of 3 or 4 objectives for the future work of the Black Family Summit, what would they be?
Well, the first one, and this is a personal one, I've been working with Dr. Patricia Pat Newton, past president of the Black Psychiatrists of America, around trafficking, human trafficking. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. and the whole issue of sexual abuse. And that's a personal issue for me. I'm pained when our women suffer. I'm pained when they're taken advantage of sexually. Sexual exploitation just guts me. It angers me. So one thing that I really am hoping that we will do in the collective is to figure out a way to have a national conversation for 3 or 4 days on all the issues that human trafficking encompasses. The human cost, emotionally and otherwise. And I would hope that we would be able to come out of that with recommendations legislatively, but most importantly, some models that could be shared with our community about how can we begin to address that issue. The second idea that continues to circulate in my mind has to do with the work that Kennedy Braswell is doing with Fathers Incorporated, which is also a member of the Black Family Summit. And that is how do we sensitize and train black fathers to become more responsible. That is just so critical from my perspective. As black men, we rarely have these conversations. It's something that's sort of left in the background, which then makes it difficult for us to have a conversation about how we contribute to the abuse of our sisters. So that's the second priority for me personally. These are my personal priorities. These are things that just hit me from the heart. And I think a lot of it has to do with my former experience as Commissioner of Youth Services for the state of New York, and recognizing what children came into our system as a result of. And a lot of it had to do with the abuse, substance abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, and the list is endless. So those things still resonate with me. And I know that they are that way because not that they were bad children, but it's how society had set up conditions that made it impossible for them to be nothing other than what they've become. So that's a passion of mine. Third, in terms of the Black Family Summit, I need to figure out and hear from them, and hopefully part of the conversation we'll be having on the 25th rather, when we do the memorandum of agreement signing. We've asked them to come to this conversation with what are some of their priorities, and how then can we in the collective support their priorities. And coming out of that will hopefully be some ideas from them as to what else can we do as IBW Black Family Summit organizations to elevate those issues. That's some of where I'm thinking at the moment. Let me just, before I close, or we close, I mean, I would be remiss were I not to acknowledge that this is not a Leonard Dunston effort. This has been a collective effort. I always pay homage to the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan for his vision of there being a need to bring black professional organizations together to think about how can you pool this mass reservoir of resources in a way that positively impacts our communities. Secondly, Dr. Daniels always talks about the need to come out of our silos and have conversations just around an issue and how can we mobilize support for that. I'm always reminded that the work that I've been able to do with the Institute of Black Family 21st Century, Black Family Summit 21st Century's work, has been done because I've had enormous support from individuals like Rosalind Prudhomme, who is my business partner, but also was my deputy commissioner when I was Commissioner of Youth Service for the state of New York, and was my campaign manager when I ran for president of the National Association of Black Social Workers. She has been just a fantastic supporter, a brilliant woman who has helped me see through things. Jackie Patterson. I mean, the work that we're doing now in terms of this FEMA agreement, it could never have happened without Jackie. Jackie is a quiet warrior, an astute tactician, and on I could go about her. And naturally, our president, Ron Daniels, the chair of our board, Rick Adams, and you as a director of communications for the Institute of Black World 21st Century, who has taken our communications level to a level that we never envisioned. So while I may be interviewing for this segment, it's the collective. That's the part I want to focus on that has gotten me to this point. And last and certainly not least, my dear and beloved friend who's also a board member, Richard Jones, who is Chief of Staff for the President of Medgar Evers College, a quiet warrior who has always been there to offer me ideas and support. I have to say this because while the interview has been focused on me, it's not me. And last and certainly not least, none of this work I could have done over these many years without the support of my wife of 57 years, the mother of two great children, Gladys Sapp Dunston. Again, I'm the person who's always in the public light. Been in this work now for almost 40 years, but it's been her who has given me the support, who I've been able to, cry with when necessary, and on and on. So that's the spirit in which I really wanted to conclude this interview, because again, it's just not about the person that you're looking at, Leonard Dunston. It's about the African collective.
Beautiful.